The Midnight Cry. We're going to begin first by looking at the 25th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to be reading the first 13 verses. This is a parable. A parable is a teaching. Jesus taught primarily by parables. It is an earthly message with a heavenly meaning. Jesus himself says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, but then the other 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise, they took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight, there was a cry, the midnight cry. 'Here's the bridegroom. Come out to meet him.' Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, 'Hey, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered, 'Since there will be not enough for us to give to you, go down to the store, go to the local dealer, and buy some for yourself.' And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came, also saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he answered, 'Truly I say to you, I don't know you. I know not who you are. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" May God add his blessing to the reading, the proclamation, the understanding of his holy and blessed word. I'd like to begin today by sharing a story, a true story, that's one of many stories that came from the sinking Titanic. A frightened lady found her place in a lifeboat that was being lowered into the raging Atlantic Ocean, when suddenly she thought of something that she needed back there in her stateroom. They granted her permission, but they said, "We'll give you 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, this lifeboat is leaving, whether you're here or not." So she ran across the deck that was already slanted at a dangerous angle because of the wreckage. Then she ran across the gambling room that had money laying all over the place. And she finally got to her stateroom. That's the living quarters there on that ship. Just a little small room usually. She pushed aside all the jewelry, all that expensive jewelry that she had. She pushed aside the diamond ring. She pushed aside the bracelet and the necklaces. And she reached over the bed on a shelf and grabbed 3 oranges. And then she ran back and got on that lifeboat. Now that seems a little ridiculous when I first read that story. Here she is, getting ready to get into a lifeboat to save her life, but then she wanted to go get something, but something of no value. 3 oranges? But we need to remember that death had already boarded that Titanic. And things that seemingly were so important a few minutes earlier were now not nearly as important. Things like that have a way of transforming our values. In an instant, priceless things became worthless, and worthless things, like oranges, became priceless. And in that moment, she chose those 3 oranges over a crate of diamonds and money just laying around on the floor. Now, I use that story as a preface to remind us that there are events in life which has the power to transform the things and the ways we look at the world. There are times we just have to step back and realize that this has happened, and this has happened, and this has happened, and it's transformed our thinking. And things that maybe mattered so much years ago maybe don't matter quite so much. And the things that we took for granted as never meaning anything now have become to mean something very special. Well, this parable that Jesus taught is about 10 virgins, and it offers a very wonderful, beautiful, powerful lesson. I told the 9 o'clock service this morning, I cannot find any documentation where I've ever preached on this message. I'm sure I have somewhere along the way, but it was one of those times that I didn't feel good about that message probably, and just didn't record that. That was back when I feel like my preaching and my messages were so shallow. And I can look back several years ago and I thought, I'll never preach that sermon again. But this one is new, and I pulled out some things here that I never had thought about. See, this parable is about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Do you think he's coming? I'm preaching to the choir here, okay? I know that. I know you know that. But there's a world of people out there have no idea what the second coming is. And then if they know a little bit about it, they don't want to talk about it. They want to ignore it. They want to act as if it is not going to happen. Now, in this parable, Jesus doesn't make any reference to the second coming. But in that parable itself, it describes it by itself. You see that woman? That woman that was in that lifeboat on that sinking Titanic understood it in the midst of her current situation where time was of essence and she had to get something done and get it done quickly. She knew that preparation was important. And those 3 oranges meant more to her, thinking that might cause me to live a little longer and go a little further than all the diamonds and all the money in the world. In this world, we know that Christ could come at any given moment. Now, I'm not going to tell you he's going to come while I'm preaching today. Some of you might wish he would, so that I'd be over. I'm not even going to tell you he's going to come in my lifetime or yours, because I don't know. But likewise, I'd never stand up here and tell you there's no way he'll come today, or no way he'll come in your lifetime, because he is returning. Now, this is about a wedding. Now, wedding's one of those kinds of events that I just had one yesterday in Indiana, about an hour and a half from here, indirectly connected to some people from our church. But anytime that I have that rehearsal on a Friday night, I always try to admonish those people. Now make sure that you're here on time tomorrow. Make sure that you're dressed by such and such time, and go through a few little things that I'd like to remind them of. One of my biggest pleas is make sure that you're here and on time. Now sometimes that works. Sometimes they don't hear it. Or maybe they don't do it. Okay, maybe they heard it. Well, this parable that we're looking at today is told from the vantage point of 10 young maidens who were invited to a very happy occasion. Now, the parable tells us that there's 5 foolish maidens, and then there's 5 wise. Now, what was the measure of how do you determine which of the 5 were wise, and how do you determine which of the 5 were, in Jesus' words, foolish? If I could sum it up in one sentence, it all has to do with the readiness of the event. This is a wedding. You got to be ready. And then the analogy is for us to be ready. All the young women had oil. They all had oil in their lamps, But the 5 that were deemed wise had an extra supply of oil. Now, weddings today are generally announced months ahead of time. I've got a couple on my calendar now for next year. Now, that doesn't happen that often, okay? But most of them are generally months in advance. But in that particular day and time when this story, this parable is unfolding, weddings could come with very little announcement. They would run through the streets, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh." And the alert ones were at the wedding party. They would respond. But those that were sleeping were left behind. Now in this parable, the cry came at midnight, at the midnight hour. Now, this is often the case. Most bridegrooms at that particular point in time would choose to come late at night. And the sleeping attendants in this parable here were awakened. But it is then that they realized that they did not have enough of oil in their lamps to last them through the night. So what did they do? They probably did what any of us would do if we were in a given situation. They would panic. What do we do? Don't have enough oil to get us through the night. So they attempted to borrow from the other 5 maidens. But their response was, "If we give you our oil, then we are not going to have enough. Hurry out and go down to the dealer. Go down to the sweet oil store and get your own. Go down to the local Walmart there in Jerusalem." So the 5 foolish maidens rushed out. But the way this parable unfolds is, by the time they returned, the door was shut. The door was shut. I think the King James Version says it was shut and locked. It was shut and locked. They knocked on the door and they pleaded, they pounded, "Let me in, let me in, let me in." But if you belong to this event, you're to be ready. And then Jesus concluded, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Okay, let's just stop a minute. Let's just try to soak all this in. This is a parable that Jesus taught. Getting pretty close to 2,000 years ago. How can something 2,000 years ago relate to where I am right now? How can it relate to where you are right now? Is there something in this parable that I can take home with me and you can take home with you? Take it out there in the market. This is what I really need to learn from this parable. You're sitting out there asking, what can I learn from this parable? Well, I'm glad you're asking, because I'm going to tell you this morning at least 3 things that you can learn. The first one is there are some things in life that cannot be borrowed. There are some things in life that cannot be borrowed. You and I cannot live on somebody else's oil all the time. Oh, we can help each other, and I encourage that. We need to do that. We need to help each other. But somewhere along the way, we've got to do it on our own. And when I think about this, this is especially true when it comes to our faith. The road entitled Our Religious Pilgrimage is a narrow road. And it can only be walked 2 at a time. You and God. Only 2 at a time. Oh yeah, there'll be people that will undergird you and encourage you. Your parents will walk with you, at least to a certain point. Your spouses, your mates, your best friend. But the bottom line is, somewhere along the way, you've got to do what has to be done. You cannot continue to borrow, and you really can't borrow from the faith of someone else. Whatever you may know about faith, you need to know that faith is the most intensely personal experience that you'll ever have in your walk and in your relationship with the Lord. Having that faith, it is so very important. Others will help you along the way. They will lead you in the right direction. They will encourage you. They can pray with you. They can pray for you. They can bring you up in the nurture and admonition of God's word and teach you what faith is. But along the way, you've got to embrace that faith. I can't give you my faith. You can't give me yours. There are certain things in life that just cannot be borrowed. So the 5 foolish maidens, they were foolish, but they were foolish because they could not rely on borrowing oil from someone else. And what they discovered was there's some things you have to do on your own. You have to prepare yourself. Now, there's a second thing that I've discovered here. There are some things that cannot be put off to the last minute. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. How many procrastinators do we have? Don't raise your hand, okay? Oh, I got one, okay, Eddie. Thank you for your confession, okay? We all have a tendency, many times, to procrastinate. Now, Gary, I know you and I have talked about this before, and our trustees, we've talked about our insurance policy. And I've looked at that insurance policy before. I don't remember whether or not we have earthquake insurance or not. But if we don't, say we don't have earthquake insurance with our insurance policy, but then an earthquake comes, in that 20 seconds that can bring about tremendous damage, we can't gather our deacons or trustees and organize some kind of committee to go out and shop for the best rates on earthquake insurance. Don't be too late. There's some things you cannot put off till the last moment. What about up there in the nursery? Or maybe in your own home? What about diapers and wipes? When you need them, you need them. You know, in that 5 minutes that it takes or less to make a mess, you can't run down to the Sweet Orange store and get your diapers and wipes. It's too late. There are some things you cannot put off to the last moment. Students, and I know we've got a few teachers in here too that know something about this. What about those mid-term exams? You can't take everything that you've learned in 2 months and try to cram it in on a cram session the night before at IHOP. I know I've done that. I've been there. You can't do that. There's some things you cannot put off. And one of those things is being prepared. See, there are things in the lives of all of us I have to admit, we can't put it off. But it amazes me. It amazes me the more I walk down ministry lane, the people that fail to grasp that concept, that you can't put it off. And sometimes people will put off the most important decisions in their life. Driving down the road the other day, contrary to what some of you might think, I think about a lot of things. A lot of things should whirl through my mind in a week's time. I think about, over my years in ministry, how many couples, I can't even begin to count, that had never darkened the door of a church anywhere. And then all of a sudden, there's marital issues going on. And they begin to panic, and they're rushing to the church and hoping that the church can offer a last-minute solution to keep everything from going down the tube. And then, when it doesn't, they wonder why religion failed them. Why was the church not there why couldn't the church pull out some kind of a miracle? Well, this is what your take home is today, okay? If you remember anything, you take this home with you. You cannot make withdrawals until you first make deposits. And we need to be building up a deposit of God's word and God's promises so we can draw for them and not wait till the last minute. There's just some things we cannot put off. Why is it? Why is it that sometimes we look at the most important decisions in our life and not do anything about it? Why do we do that? Well, I think Jesus would say in response to this parable right here, is because we're foolish. Now, you want to be in that group of foolish people, or you want to be in the group of the wise people that's making preparation and planning for what they need to plan. It is the foolish person who cannot look down the long road. Let's just stop for a moment. Every one of us need to take a look down that long road. Going back to what I said with the children today, looking at the direction that we're going. What does that long road view look like? These foolish maidens did not give sufficient forethought to what was needed. But then there's a third thing here. This will be my final lesson that I can draw from this parable. If we are not prepared, then we can miss the greatest opportunity of our life. Now see, the issue here in this parable is one of readiness, being ready when the Lord returns. Now, we've all shaken our heads in response, yeah, I believe the Lord's coming. Well, I don't know that he's not coming today. I don't know that he's not coming in my lifetime. I need to be ready. You need to make sure you're ready. When God holds that grand celebration, are you going to be there? Or are you going to be ready? See, we need to understand that this parable has an element of judgment. An element of judgment, an element of accountability. When the foolish maidens arrived at that party, after they went out and got more oil, verse 10 tells us that the door was shut. Now that reminds me of Noah. Certainly you remember the story of Noah gathering his family there in the ark. And then that great flood came, and there was many that came knocking and pounding on the door, begging to get in. But we also see that Genesis tells us that God shut the door. Now, both of those are metaphors to God's judgment. They're metaphors to God's judgment, and they remind us that when God shuts a door, no man can open that door. Now, Jesus is telling us right here in this simple parable about the tragedy of an unprepared life. Jesus said that we are at all times to be prepared, for we know not the day, we know not the hour. This could be another take-home for you. The best way to be prepared for tomorrow is to be ready today. The best way to be prepared for tomorrow is to be ready today. A time will come when there will be no time for further preparation. When the Lord breaks through, and if you don't already know the Lord, it's going to be too late. The door will be shut. Let me close by sharing a personal story. Actually, when I think back over the beautiful men and women of faith that I have known in 30 years here at Pleasant Ridge, there's been a number of people that have said something similar to this. But I say this with permission from Kathy, her mother Doris, Many of you all remember Doris Smith. And by goodness, such a beautiful person, such a strong, powerful prayer warrior. I knew I was prayed for every day by her, by name, every day. I miss that. We've had a lot of those prayer warriors that have slipped out to eternity. I'm not sure that we've got enough replacing those that have slipped out, because we need a lot of those. But I remember Doris being at St. Elizabeth Edgewood, one of many places that she was hospitalized. And the best that I can recall, it was in November. Not sure what year that was, but it's been several years ago. And I remember them telling her that, this is some serious, she'd had so much sickness for 15, 20, 30 years at that point. But I remember her saying, now, Milkweed, if everything turns out all right, that's great. But if everything doesn't turn out right, it's still okay. It's still okay. See, that was the language of being prepared for what was to happen. How prepared are you? I really want to be around here. I want to live. I want to be active in ministry till I'm in my 90s. I got 40 more years to go, I think. But I want to be prepared whenever that time comes. So the question for each of us is, are we prepared? Don't be